All right, welcome back to GTMN with Austin Hay and Pranav. Myself, it's weird calling myself in third person. Um,
Okay.
I know, that
Can
was
I
awkward.
introduce this next time? I can introduce you, Pranav.
Exactly. It's April 27th. We have a new schedule. So we were looking at our calendars and got really messy on Thursdays and Fridays when we typically record this thing. So we're switching things up and we're going to be coming to you on Tuesdays of every week going forward. So we'll record on Mondays, release on Tuesdays, have the newsletter go out on Wednesdays. And yeah, so another great week to cover for us. I actually want to start with an interesting piece of research, Austin, that I uncovered this morning from this company called Basis.com. It's a great name. Basis.com, free advertising for Basis.com. I've now said it 3 times. They build software that they call sort of operating system for advertisers and workflows and all that fun stuff. But the interesting piece of news that they released was this new 2026 advertising agency report and a bunch of interesting things in this report. 92% of agency decision makers declaring the traditional model broken. It's not a surprise, at least not to anybody listening to this podcast. I feel the same way. 87% saying that the current agency model will be unsustainable within the next 3 to 5 years. And why they're saying this is all because of the margin squeeze. Clients are expecting faster AI-powered output and are unwilling to pay legacy hourly rates. So everything is going to be pivoting towards this outcome-based pricing, but most agencies aren't ready for that, right? Like that's just not how they work. That's not how their business models are working. And so I'm curious if you see the same, but I think this is very much on point. I don't even know if it's 3 to 5 years. It might be closer than that. Like in the next 1 to 2 years, I expect most agencies to start to try out outcome-based pricing, given what customers are wanting. What's your take?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on what we mean by agency. Interestingly, the media agencies often used to charge and still try to charge on a percent of media buy. So if you have a $100 million campaign, they're charging X percent of campaign dollars spent. But over time, people realize that's a really bad incentive because it incentivizes them to spend money, not to be efficient. And, sometimes you may want to spend and your goal is to try to spend on as many channels as possible. So you want to incentivize that behavior. But most often, especially for startups, A to D, the goal is not to necessarily spend everything. It's to spend efficiently to get a goal. And so I've seen this actually a handful of times recently where that whole value prop comes under duress. And then I think for the AI value prop, it's interesting because I personally, when I do consulting engagements and advisements, I never charge on hours because it's like a losing battle. And also, how do you quantify hours anymore? I've been working with a founder for the last 3 months and we'll have a conversation and then I'll create some stuff with Claude and do some analyses and talk in Slack. So how would I quantify, the work that is being done when an AI agent is producing a lot of the things that are in my head? So I think it's just really, really challenging to have an hourly model at all. But the outcome thing is interesting because I don't know if agencies are really well equipped for outcomes unless it's an engineering agency. For example, back 6 or 7 years ago, there was a company called Prolific, which was an agency. And a big part of the work that they did would be helping marketing teams understand, marketing and then deploy some technology around those marketing ads. And they had this little pod structure where they'd set up a designer, an engineer, and a growth manager to work on projects together. To me, that makes a lot of sense. I think WillowTree actually is an agency that does that. So maybe we'll see more of that. But yeah, so I'd actually be curious too to hear your perspective on, how will people charge when a lot of the value is distilled to AI? This is something I'm thinking about. I gave a client recently a private MCP, which I call Martech Demigod. And it's an MCP that has access to a ton of my historical information about MarTech and the things that I do, along with 12 or 15 other agents and about 100 skills. So what are you paying for at that point? I don't know.
Yeah.
This is where just value-based selling is kind of king.
The answer for us, like, and I haven't spoken publicly about this before, but I am going to break some news on GTMN. So the way we're thinking about this at Paramark is, if you are not driving incremental growth as an advertising agency, and I'll just talk about sort of, media agency, advertising agency, like the marketing agency types, not sort of AI workflows or AI sort of driven sort of automation and what have you, right? So if you're in the business of advertising and driving growth, then outcome-based pricing really just drives down to, are you helping the brand maintain efficient growth or accelerate efficient growth? And the answers to those two, or which one do you pick, depends on the stage of the company. If you're a very mature brand, then maintaining is probably just as good as increasing, right? If you're a Coca-Cola, you're a Unilever, Salesforce.com, you're not trying to necessarily increase your net new customer acquisition growth every quarter. You're just trying to maintain it. At least for your core products. If you're a fast-growing brand, it's all about driving net new incremental growth. So the growth rate should be increasing every quarter. And so if you're an agency and you're not delivering on those two promises, you won't be able to charge for your services anymore. That's my sort of gut feel, because you are seeing the connective sort of, and why do I say this? I say this because the old school way of doing things, which was hourly billing, is so commoditized. And the perception of value is so low because you have things like Claude and OpenAI and Gemini, that the only way to counter that is to have a different economic incentive. And it's not just about the output of the work, it's now the outcomes. That's just going to happen. Yep. And even if it's unfair, even if it's unrealistic, even if it's maybe sort of far-fetched, it'll have to happen. So you might as well jump on that train if you're an agency and get ahead of it, because that's what's going to be the case in 5 years from now.
Yeah. I mean, it cuts both ways, because on one hand, if you're an agency that understands how to use AI, you actually have a huge opportunity to make a ton of money, meaning you can deliver on client engagements at a fraction of the prior human cost.
Exactly.
And and I don't think companies have really caught up. At the same time, if you're not good with AI, you're going to be squeezed really, really hard. So it effectively means that the companies that are best positioned are the ones who are taking advantage of AI and saying, hey, how can we deploy this technology to do the work that we're doing, or net new work, as fast and as easy as possible? The example I talked about I think it was last week or the week before, there's a company I've been advising where in December they said it was for some bottom of funnel telemetry work, like taking ad data, getting it through something like Segment and getting that into a warehouse, and then patching that up in a reverse ETL and streaming it and kind of validating that everything works. And I had said at Ramp, we did this work and there were 3 or 4 of us, and it took us a couple months, and there was a lot of ongoing work after that. And this is the first time in December where this company said, actually, we want you to try doing it on your own. Just try getting as far as you can with Claude Code. And so obviously this is a solopreneur or a single advisement example, but I think that is representative of what's happening with lots of agencies out there, is this question of how far can we get with fewer people and using Claude Code to do the job. For what it's worth, though, is I think I've found the limit, right? This is like an asymptote, and there is a limit that I have found now on what you can actually do. And we talked a little bit about this, but it gets into the nature of the probabilistic and deterministic nature of LLMs right now. The thing that I'm finding really, really interesting about work that engineering used to do is that, I like to say that I'm a bad engineer. And so when I'm doing engineering work, I'm relying on Claude Code or my LLM of choice to come up with an elegant solution. And a lot of times it gets it right, and then we're able to move on to the next issue. But a lot of times it gets it wrong. And so you're in this kind of random walk. You're throwing darts at the wall, and you're trying to get the dart in the center circle every single time. With an engineering team and humans in control, you have the ability to hit the dart perfectly. It just takes time. With an LLM, you have to keep throwing darts. And so this has been something I've been explaining to a lot of people who hire agencies, is that you're going to notice that some work will get really, really better and faster, and other work inexplainably will actually get worse. And that's literally just because, they're using LLMs to solve problems, and those LLMs might make mistakes. And so you have to expect that there'll be a little bit more of a random walk as agencies and people like myself and yourself start using these tools to try to solve problems.
That's a great analogy, actually. I think that you're spot on in terms of like the engineering way of doing things versus the LLM way of doing things. You're just accepting a wider margin of error,
Yeah.
right?
And not to like nerd out here, but this is a show for it. Like a really good example is, and I'll share this. I won't share the client's name, but I'll be really specific. It's like we're having trouble collecting this attribute on web. It's like a parameter from Meta, and we have all our telemetry set up and we're collecting it with Segment. But like for whatever reason, it's not making its way to Meta. And so we're like investigating with Claude Code to figure out where and how it's broken. And every time I talk to Claude Code, I review its code. I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. I'm a bad engineer, but like I look at the code and it makes sense. And then we deploy it and nothing changes. So the question in my mind is like, are these all just bugs that would have already existed? Or is basically Claude Code, helping find lots of problems and we're throwing the dart each time to try to solve this problem? Eventually the dart's going to stick and Claude Code's going to help us fix it. And it's not like I'm a bad prompter either. I'm not like being like, fix the problem. So there is a level of like deep analysis involved in all this, but it's still just, it's showing the limit, which is that, these coding agents can't solve all complexity problems that exist. Even though
I think there's another issue here, right? Like usually the MarTech stack is so brittle that even finding these types of bugs and issues is actually quite challenging. You know this from your experience, right? Like it's just that's an inherent issue with MarTech. So how many times the Meta API changes and it's not disclosed in any public way, and you're just so is it that Segment and Meta just stop speaking, or is it actually something that you're doing wrong and it'll get just fixed in like 3 days without you noticing, right? There's so many weird things that happen in this space.
Well, yeah, and this is the reason why actually a new criteria that I have for a lot of tools recently is like, does it have an API and does it have an error reporting API? Because effectively what's happening with this client is like, I'm finding problems and bugs. I'm getting the alerts in a Slack channel or an email, and then I'm fixing them. And I'm like, if the agents could just listen and create the PRs and assign them, we would speed up the learning loop and we'd go from not knowing the problem to solving the problems instantly. And that way, if something breaks, telemetry changes, API changes, it doesn't even matter. There'll be an alert, an agent will spin up with a session, it will draft the PR. Yeah. So now our theoretical, movement limit is just how quickly a human can approve a PR. And frankly speaking, you could like have another Codex agent review that and approve it automatically. So you get to this point where as long as you've set up the system correctly and it's working, it can self-heal. And self-healing systems, I think, are like the future. But again, as we get back to the main point with agencies, I think like all these challenges we're talking about where like you're using agents to solve outcomes, but it's a somewhat of a random walk. I think more and more companies are going to encounter this as they start to use agencies where they're using Claude Code as a way to kind of like have higher profit margins. Because previously you'd be like, well, if this engineer doesn't get it right, it's like a bad engineer. But what happens when we all agree we're using Claude Code to solve problems, but it's just not right?
Okay, few other interesting tidbits from this report before we move on. So 70% of agency professionals say that their jobs are more difficult today than they were 2 years ago. Wild. 54% say client relationships are more strained, driven by higher expectations, compressed timelines, and increased scrutiny. Like, it's nightmarish if you're in an agency right now, or if you have any type of, customer-facing job, because customers have been habituated to type it into a prompt and get immediate results. And they're like, why can't you do just what Claude does? And so it's a really, really hard time for anybody in a service business. Okay, inefficient processes, so 44% people saying this, and siloed or disconnected systems, 40% of people saying this, remain the top challenges, not unchanged from before. Okay, another one. More than 1/3 of agencies are now managing 10 or more tools, more than double the share reported just 2 years ago. Just crazy stats all across the board. And confidence is down. 40% of agencies have conducted layoffs in the past year. Like, if there is one, corner of the marketing world where we're seeing just massive, massive issues, it's the agency world.
Mm-hmm. No
it's
doubt,
sad,
man.
but it is the truth. Yeah.
I know. I mean, I think it's a really good time to be in the world of trying to do agency work without being an agency.
I completely agree. Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's it. Okay. Couple of other things that have come out this in the last few days. So the first is there's another sort of company that released a report about, how consumers make decisions. And essentially this study from MeCue, I don't know what brand this is, so, hopefully it's a good brand. MeCue is also another software platform that shows that their research shows that users now engage with an average of 12 different touch points across 3+ devices before a single conversion. And AI search is often the middle of the funnel filter, not top of funnel, not bottom of funnel. This is obviously just one report and one study, but just, the fact that watching, browsing, buying, and these non-linear ways of jumping between those two and AI agents that are in the middle of the funnel acting as sort of personal shoppers, it just changes how people should be thinking about sort of media buying and influencing consumers. So the reason I'm bringing this report up is there's a part of online LinkedIn and X conversation which is all about LLMs, right?
Mm-hmm.
LLMs are changing the world. They're going to be agentic commerce, blah, blah, blah. And the reality is just not that. It's way more diverse. And, the idea that you can measure these things through straight up, last touch, multi-touch attribution models just doesn't work. So I'm already, incrementality pilled on this topic, but I'm curious if you, see the same thing in your customer base, or what's your take on this complicated journey stuff?
I mean, my viewpoint for a long time has been that when you're trying to measure attribution and when you're trying to understand if something is working, you have to acknowledge that first last touch is just a single story that you're telling yourself. The story of how a customer finds and buys your product is actually really complex, and it's not a linear journey. I think the unfortunate side of the 2010s to 2020s is that a whole generation of marketers started to believe that marketing was some type of linear journey, when it's more like a snowball, right? There's a place where things touch, and you can measure the curves on the slope where things change. But ultimately, lots of things compound to drive the buying decision. So in LLMs is a great example, right? When you type into the LLM, there's one of two things happening. One is maybe you're searching, and that's the first touch, or maybe one you're confirming, which is the middle or last touch. And we're going to have even less visibility into people confirming information when they're using an LLM, because your LLM isn't a browser session. So it's completely disconnected from all the other touches you have. And even if you were to get the purchase data and get the email address of the user when they checked out and map that with their logged in state before, we're seeing very fragmented views of customers. So that's where I think some of these advanced methodologies, which we've talked about a lot and which I've published a bunch of information on, are really important. Use the first and last touch for directional guidance, but we're in a world now that resembles much more, I think, the past, which is where you actually rely much more on gut and feel, or taste as they call it. There was that great article I think I shared with you, how suddenly taste is the most important word in Silicon Valley. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Taste is the word. We should put it in the. I'll link it in the newsletter when we send this out. I completely agree.
New Yorker. It was why tech bros are now obsessed with taste, and I guess we are tech bros. So
we are tech bros.
Yeah.
Did you know that TBPN was originally the Tech Bros podcast, and then they changed it to Technology and Business Podcasting Network?
Oh, of course, it was Tech. I've always thought it was Tech Bros Pod Network.
Yeah, they cleaned it up quickly because they didn't want to be perceived as Tech Bros. But
I mean, they are
we didn't talk about that outcome, right? What? Yeah, exactly. But we didn't talk about TBPN's acquisition by OpenAI and the ensuing, everybody's launching live shows now. And hey, full credit to them. I was kind of inspired by them to even call this thing GTMN. I think this format is incredibly compelling. But A16Z launched something called, I can't remember now. It's a daily live show called MTS. Have you heard of this? It's monitoring the situation.
Yeah.
Oh
I'm
my
not going to
God.
say anything about the name as I have like an A16Z ducky behind me. You guys can. My
Oh,
wife.
wait, no. A16Z is investing in this. I'm so confused. Wait, is this an A16Z company? Or
I
is
thought
this
I thought they were publishing like a news network. But I mean, the real thing to talk about is like, why are people doing this? I have a thesis, but I'm curious for you to tell me why you think all of a sudden we're having more news network style podcasts.
Huh. Okay. Well, I don't know. I haven't thought deeply about it, but I think that my reaction to this is it comes back to I don't know if you were talking about this concept of IRL. Like if it's not happening in IRL, then I'm not going to I'm not going to publish it. And it's kind of related to that, which is like you're creating your own IRL moments using these live shows rather than, like rehashing what might be going on the internet. So maybe some of it is that. The other is like, this is if you study history, every powerful organization has owned media. So whether it's the newspaper, whether it's, news networks, and now it's YouTube shows and podcasts. So it's part of the same trend. Nothing new. This is very much what happens in history. So that's another sort of way to think about, what's happening here.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only thing I would add is the reason why it feels like it's all of a sudden all at once is because more than ever, AI has taught us that distribution is the last moat. Distribution is everything.
Absolutely. Yep.
So if anybody can create things quickly, then distribution is all that matters. And I actually had this conversation with a friend who's an entrepreneur last week. He's like, I have these cool ideas. I want to build some stuff. I was like, look, man, it's not that this is a bad idea. It's a great idea, but how are you going to get it to thousands of people? How are you going to get it to 10
Yep.
people, 50 people? So I think increasingly when I talk to founders and entrepreneurs, I ask this question, which is just like, how are you going to distribute? And that's the reason why we're doing this is because we're trying to create distribution around marketing, trying to create an audience, trying to create community. Those things can all be, they can all coexist at the same time. But the reality is it's distribution. It's really, really hard to break through the noise on LinkedIn. So we're trying to do it somewhere else. And I think that's going to continue to be the case. As channels become saturated, new opportunities to distribute will open up. And this has long been the case. If you're one of those early explorers on channel, you reap the rewards. So this is like no different than the stuff we preach for marketing.
I completely agree. And I was just going to So MTS, which is the new show that I just realized it's not actually an A16Z show. A16Z is funding. It's a seed round for MTS, which is the media company, which is interesting and different from the whole, like what happened with TBPN. And then it also made me realize, I came across this, the Acquired podcast has become the most expensive from a advertising rate perspective. So the rate, okay, you're not going to believe this. The rate for mid-roll ads are sometimes as high as $4.7 million. Did you hear that number? Like $4.7 million. And this is for fall of 2029. So like they're sold out for
3 years out.
They're 3 years out. They're sold out for 2027. It's just ridiculous, dude.
So just,
like, can you imagine this?
Probably making $50+ million a year on a podcast.
Easy.
Let's assume there's not one episode a week. There's usually like one a month. And, if it's $4 million for the mid, you can probably assume it's, I don't know, $10 million a show, something like that. So 120 million, even with a hefty, margin on top, it's probably 50 million for each of them. It's crazy.
Crazy business. Crazy good business.
And also what I admire so much about Acquired in particular is it's so good. It's so intellectual. I feel like I'm learning. And I also just love that, they're learning in the process. So one of the things that I just love about that podcast and also Lenny's is it just proves that there are ways to make money and have a great time doing it. So anytime I get a little bit too pessimistic about life in Silicon Valley, I remember there are these shining examples of people who've been figuring out how to make money and have a good time doing it. But it wasn't an overnight success. It took 8 years. We've been doing
Yes,
that for a
indeed.
long
And
time.
in fact, I was also following have you heard of the My First Million podcast? It's like the complete opposite of the Acquired podcast,
Yeah.
right? It's like it's what I would call sort of lots of pop business information, right? This is like just quick hits on lots of success that people have in business and tech. And they were saying, yeah, our first like 4 years, episodes would get like 100 views or 800 views or something like that, and they just powered through all of that because they were just enjoying it. And so, to your point, even MKBHD and Mr. Beast, if you go back and look at their first few YouTube episodes or shows, they had nothing. It was just like speaking into the void for like years and years. They just stuck through it and persevered, and because they enjoyed it. Okay. So we're talking about distribution. So I completely agree with your point. Let's come back to like LinkedIn. LinkedIn changed something apparently recently on their algorithm. And so new update to its feed algorithm in April that officially prioritizes expertise signals, which means saves reshares by verified industry leaders over raw engagement like likes. So essentially, anything that is deemed generic and is just getting a bunch of likes is now being suppressed. But if you can demonstrate deeper expertise and meaningful consistency, it's receiving a much bigger multiplier on reach compared to everything else. So it comes back like I think they're fighting generic like AI slop pretty well. And so if you're looking to do better on LinkedIn, go back to writing like a human being yourself, like use AI in the process, but it's got to be something inspiring from a real life like expertise, and keep it consistent. Don't keep changing the thing that you're talking about. That's at least what this report says. So yeah,
I got kind of tired of LinkedIn. I've been off LinkedIn for like the last month. I'm taking
okay,
a mental health break, which I think
great.
we'll see more people do. Because on one hand, LinkedIn is such a useful well of information. Like I know a lot of people diss on it and they're like, oh, it's so vapid and blah blah blah. And like, yeah, there's a lot of bullshit out there. My favorite is just like people proclaiming that they built agents that like run their whole business. There's also like a lot of really good information, and I find lots of great articles. But I just think like it kind of sucks me in too much, and I probably don't have the right amount of willpower to like be able to put it away. So what I'm thinking about more is how I kind of structure a learning loop around LinkedIn to like get the information and value, but not necessarily have to participate in the network. It's just so hard though, because there are times where I'll read something and I'm like, oh, I have a really good perspective and I actually want to comment. But yeah, I just don't want it to be all consuming and intensive. And you can pour in a limitless amount of time into these things. So it's just a little bit tough. What do you do? How do you kind of balance getting value out of these platforms versus it being away from you?
I mean, honestly, like it's a non-negotiable for me because of how much business we get through LinkedIn. So
Sure.
it's hard to kind of turn that off. But at the same time, right, my schedule only allows for like maybe 30 minutes a day of LinkedIn. A little bit in the morning, a little bit in the evening, and then I'm done with it. I use it a lot for saving stuff because, again, like you said, so I curate my feed quite a lot. There's a lot of like academics, there's a lot of like PhDs and marketing science experts. There's a lot of like top CMOs who are sharing their work or their reasoning about X, Y, and Z. So that curation helps. So it's not like random people. And then, just time boxing it. That's the way to do it. And then I have to just show up because otherwise, the algo is not going to promote Paramark and my own brand, and I can't afford to do that given it's LinkedIn. So it works really well for us.
My wife, Layla, had this rule going back to her early days at A16Z where she would never add a connection that she had not met in real life or like had a conversation with them. And so her LinkedIn network is like really good. It's super pure because she like does not accept invites from anybody that she like just doesn't know. And I think like
rule.
early in my career, I was just adding people and like I'd meet folks at a random event. And now all of a sudden, it's just like a bunch of garbage. And like the thought of having to, cultivate it and make it useful is daunting. I think there are tools now that help you do it. But, it actually reminds me a little bit of Facebook back in the early 2000s when like the goal was to have a lot of friends. And so you'd add all these people and then you're like, wow, now my feed is garbage.
Yeah. No, the other thing that I do on LinkedIn quite a bit is actually DMs. So I
I do a lot
DM
of DMs
people
too.
once in a while, just like, hey, you want to catch up in real life type of thing, or hey, would love to get your feedback on X, Y, and Z. And those are real, like, meaningful DMs. I'm not just like randomly spamming people. It's more about getting just people who I've lost touch with, or I had a really good interaction with, but I haven't followed up in a couple of months. Like, I try to make that a priority as well.
Yeah.
Um,
And actually, real quick AI detour. One of the best things I've built if people were looking for inspiration is I downloaded all my LinkedIn contacts. There's a number of ways to do this. So I had all the LinkedIn profiles and I just sent a scraper to get all the LinkedIn images from them. So then I had LinkedIn URLs, first name, last name, and the LinkedIn avatars. And I did a match against all of my iCloud contacts on my phone. And I just put the
mm,
LinkedIn profile and image on all of the contacts that I have that match. And so now in
nice.
my iPhone, you actually have real photos of all the people I know because my iPhone is generally like people that I text and hang
Yep,
out with and have closer relationships with. But it's amazing how much more beautiful and interesting and fun iMessage is when you have people's faces. And I feel like this is what Apple originally designed, but it's like such a crappy system because you have to like manually upload photos. So an agent just did this whole thing for me, and now my iPhone, like I'm looking at people in
that's
my
awesome.
contact book, and they're all like it's like beautiful faces with their LinkedIn. So I feel like that would be like a microservice somebody could build. It'd be really useful.
Totally.
You could just
Used to
see
be a
like
whole
all
startup
those
called Plaxo.
see all those
Yeah, yeah.
faces. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. Do you remember Plaxo or whatever? Like the very old tool for maintaining your contact book? Like, it was by, if I remember correctly, this was the Napster founder, Sean, whatever his name was. I'm forgetting. And all they did was make a contact book and like update the contact information on your phone.
Dude,
Okay.
there is need for this business, and I have built my own version of this, and it's still shitty, but somebody really needs to build this, like a multi-way sync, kind of like Calendar Bridge, but for contacts between your iPhone, all your different work contacts, LinkedIn, just like a single syndicated inbox that you can sync to different places.
There's a bunch of startups that have been built and just never worked because the market's too small, apparently.
Nobody wants to pay for it is the problem.
Exactly. Okay, a couple of other interesting things that are happening before we close this out. One is Google Merchant Center launched a new agentic onboarding for SMBs, and Meta did something similar where what they're doing now is if you just give it your URL, it will automatically crawl and understand product attributes and create sort of everything in Google Shopping and Google Ads automatically based off of those product catalogs that is picking up automatically. I don't know why this was a net new thing. Like, you could imagine just doing this even in the pre-LLM days because Google already had all that information. But maybe it's something about like connecting that into Merchant Center and Google Shopping and Google Ads, which is the agentic part of it. And then Meta's launch from like, we talked briefly about Meta launching Cappy last week, which was like an instant Cappy. But
Yeah, the one
in addition to that, they had also launched this exact same feature, which is you no longer have to manually update your product catalog. It just picks it up directly from your Meta tag on your website. So making things easier and connecting more between different systems, always great. So kudos to Google and Meta for making it easier for SMBs who don't have the time to go manually update all this stuff. And then another piece of news from Google is now AI overviews are now 48% of Google search. And this was like closer to 31% a year ago. So what I think is happening here is like basically AI overviews is just going to take over Google search in the next like 2 or 3 years. It'll go up to 100% in my opinion. Why shouldn't it? And then your default search experience is just going to be completely AI led rather than the blue links from the past. So they're taking their time doing it slowly because they don't want to like completely disrupt their advertising business. But, every quarter we're going to see that number go up and to the right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I get the AI, briefs more often, but I often find it's like not what I'm looking for because I often like use the Google search bar to like find the thing that I was going to try to type into the browser URL, which, this is the reason why you don't pay for branded search is because people
Yep.
sometimes search for your company name when they're just trying to go directly to your company website and then you're paying money for people to click on a link. But like that behavior still persists and it's obviously not in Google's interest to fix it, but that will continue to happen. Like I search for something and it's giving me AI overview. but now I don't actually want to engage AI. I want to go explore the thing myself. And then maybe I do want to use AI afterwards. But then there's this question of like, where do I do it afterwards? I think also this
Yeah.
is the reason why, what Perplexity is doing is interesting, owning the browser surface area.
Mm.
And I wouldn't be surprised if eventually Anthropic and OpenAI have like an embedded browser in all their apps where you don't even go to Google. Like you just get the answer
I'm
in the
convinced, Austin, that there is going to be a completely new hardware paradigm. New phone, new laptop that is completely sort of AI native, agent native from the ground up. Like, I'm surprised nobody's announced this, but okay, here's a
Apple
bet.
kind of did.
Oh, they did? No.
No, they did. They put the guy in charge of hardware as the CEO.
Okay,
Like,
fair point. Maybe that's yeah. So that's an indication. But the thing that I was gonna say, if there was a poly market or a Kalshi, not that I'm anyway, but we won't talk about the politics of that. If there was a betting market for, is there a hardware group inside of inside of Anthropic and inside of OpenAI that are building completely new devices around the concept of AI and agents, like literally placing your MacBook, placing your iPhone with AI native devices, like I'm pretty sure like 80 to 90% there is a hardware team that's doing this within these AI labs.
yeah, it's crazy to think like, what does hardware look like when an agent is doing most of your work for you? And
Mm-hmm.
frankly, even with the advances in Claude Code recently, I find a lot of my job is directing agents in a Claude Code shell. So
Mm-hmm.
like, how do you rethink the UI experience? Like, do you just have an application with a bunch of Claude sessions open? And there's authentication to a browser, mostly just to give the agent access to the things that you control. It also like
Mm-hmm.
kind of fundamentally changes the concept of like, an auth experience. When you're
Mm-hmm.
authing, are you taking accountability for the things that your agent does? And are companies ready to accept that liability? I'm not so sure yet.
And I also think like if I were in Google's shoes, this is a prime opportunity to completely upend the device market and further sort of strengthen their distribution. Is you go all in on your Pixel line across phones and laptops and just completely AI mode the heck out of it from the beginning.
Mm.
So, all right, one last piece. So here's an interesting thing that's happening. I was intrigued by this. So the Trade Desk, I don't know how much you know about the Trade Desk. This is like the company that claims to be the, essentially the caretakers of the open web, right? So you're essentially, it's an advertising platform for the open web. So everything that is not Google or Meta or Amazon or what have you. And their stock has been like hammered really, really badly. And they just did a $350 million share buyback. And I was looking at like what's happening in their business. It's a 840 million quarterly revenue business. So on an annual basis, that's like what, like more than 3 billion. And its stock is still down. It's still growing like 15% year over year. So this was like a big signal to the market that, hey, we think the stock is undervalued and what have you. And then I went and researched open web. So everything outside of Meta, Google, and Amazon is 37% of the advertising market a year. So it's not a small number. Like there's 180 billion that is spent on the open web, whereas Meta is 240 billion, Google is 240 billion, Amazon is about 82 billion in terms of advertising. So 37% and growing close to 15 to 20% a year. So it's not shrinking, it's growing. And I actually think the Trade Desk might be onto something that there's not that much more Meta and Google can grow. And they're going to struggle because like there's just not new interfaces and surfaces for them to continue sort of creating more inventory around. And you're going to see sort of just broad like explosion of all the open web ecosystems. I don't know if I believe it fully, but those numbers are compelling. So if I was in the market, I might actually buy some Trade Desk.
I mean, so here's the thing that I misunderstood in my 20s that I understand now. There is so much demand to spend dollars for marketing. Like you have to think about the Fortune 500 has hundreds of millions of dollars per company to spend on marketing and advertising budget. And there are only so many places to spend that money. You think about the entire world being like a very, very big place, but actually it's pretty small when you're dealing with large numbers. DSPs like Trade Desk and others, we've talked about AppLovin too, companies that aggregate supply and sell it at a premium are great businesses for a reason, because the world is only becoming more competitive to try to sell you stuff. And as we talked about before, distribution is the moat. And as traditional channels become clogged and prices rise, people look for other ways to spend dollars to get eyeballs and attention to drive the growth outcome they want. So I'm not surprised by Trade Desk. I'm also not totally surprised by AppLovin. Yes, there's like a financial fundamentals thing to all this, which we're not going into here. And certainly if a stock is overpriced relative to the amount of earnings they have, it's one thing. But like these companies are just aggregating, supply. That's all they're doing. And I think right now I would not be betting against supply.
Yep. And you're also seeing other emerging ad platforms. You mentioned AppLovin, but I'm thinking about Substack. They don't have ads. I think they will have ads. So the other thing that's happening is all the changes in AI are changing some of this stuff as well. For example, Substack has had a big thing about, open rates on emails are getting lots of pressure because of what Google is doing and changing in terms of, inboxes and placement with their new AI inbox and so on and so forth. So that's a recent, news piece that came out. So they're prioritizing their app. If you're prioritizing your app and, you only have subscriptions as a business model, at some point advertising is going to become a thing. So you'll suddenly have the ability to buy ads on Substack, on Beehive, on all these, podcasts and all the newsletters out there. The open web is big, and we should all be supporting companies like the Trade Desk because you don't want all of that inventory just to be on Meta and Google. It's going to be a very sad, way to live life if the
100%.
open web is not supported. So
100%.
Cool. All right. Austin, how's your Ironman training going?
It's going great, man. I did a 65-mile bike on Friday, and I did a 50-mile run yesterday. Did a little half marathon.
15-mile run? Wow.
Yeah, I did.
That is bonkers.
There was a little half marathon here in Alexandria, so I ran that, and I did some miles before and after.
That's impressive. I barely got 3 miles in, but I did my 3 miles this Sunday. I'm going to try and run another 2 miles or 3 miles on Wednesday, and then I'll be back to trying to do 3.5 or 4 miles this Sunday. So I'm ramping up now in preparation for November.
Well, we're going to be doing it together, man. You got a pace coach on you, so we're going to be locked and loaded. I'm going to bring Paramark, branded gels for you. We'll have a
nice
sweatband. We'll be ready to go.
All right. On that note, folks, thank you for joining another episode of GTMN.fm. If you don't subscribe yet, this is your first time listening, go give it a follow. And if you've been listening for a long time, give us a review and help support the show.
Yeah, get your agent to just summarize the episodes for you. You don't even have to listen to the last few. Just have your agent give you the TLDR, and then you can catch up next week.
There we go. All righty, Austin. See you next week, and good luck with all your training this week.
Thanks, man. See you next week. Bye, y'all.